Hi there. Getting a little later start today. It's 3:30 p.m., but the light is still good. Thanks to Philip Ruland, who suggested that when he listens to my videos, he'd like to hear my take on what happened this week before I get into the subject of my video. So let me just tell you, I watched the entire Democratic debate. I mean, usually it's just too hard to watch these things. To listen to these people, it's crazy. But it was actually quite entertaining. I mean, it was fun. Let me just mention something about Mike Bloomberg. I'm reminded of something that George H.W. Bush said after he was out of the presidency. He said, one of the things I noticed is nobody laughs at my jokes anymore. Because when you're president, obviously, everybody thinks everything you say is funny. People fawn over what you say. Didn't you get the impression from watching Michael Bloomberg? You know, he has so much money. He goes and speaks at these conferences. He gives money. So everybody listens to what he says with bated breath. Nobody questions him because they're happy he's giving money. So he just looked kind of irritated. How dare you question me? And so all Elizabeth Warren had to do was just attack him on some clear points that he was obviously going to be attacked on. And he didn't prepare for those. He spent all this money on all these consultants. And he pays them really well. I mean, don't you think that was funny? I think it was very funny. So that was one thing. The other thing was just watching the other candidates. I mean, they're so, the word I'm looking for is so amateur compared to the juggernaut that is our president, Donald Trump. I mean, just watching him all this week at his various rallies, and in particular, I really enjoyed listening to his speech to Bakersfield, because I grew up in Fresno. I spent my first 6 years on first a cotton ranch until I was about 4 or 5 years old. One of my earliest memories was riding in the back of a red cotton gin that my dad was driving, and my sister Denise and I were sitting in the back. We were really little, and the cotton was coming in. And then we had a grape farm where you made raisins, and that was always a concern that it would rain in the summer and the raisins would get wet. So I grew up in this rural environment, and I still have a lot of family members that live in the San Joaquin Valley. And my niece Rebecca and her husband Andrew, they have a citrus farm. So it was really gratifying to see what President Trump is doing for California farmers with the water. So, you know, I love Devin Nunes. And this was before he got involved in all the things regarding the plot against our president. I first noticed him because he didn't buy into all this climate change nonsense. So he was on my good list early on. And so he was there, Kevin McCarthy was there, and several others. But basically what President Trump has done is he signed a presidential memorandum to formally adopt policies that will deliver more water to the valley. And you know, he's going up against Gavin Newsom. So I was reading the Fresno Bee today. That's the paper I grew up under. And I used to write letters to the editor. I remember when I was in high school. But anyway, it was just, the farmers love him. He's fighting for them. And when you think about it, yes, we'll pick up more congressional seats in California. But, you know, it's not thought that President Trump would ever win California. But you know what? It's possible. It's possible. Not likely, but with his attacks on homelessness and that issue and helping the farmers, and then I just saw a YouTube video about, there was a huge number of pro-life. It was a pro-life rally in the Bay Area. Those people love Trump. They love him. And it's with a very strong passion. And there was a lot of people there. I didn't realize that there were that many people in the Bay Area that supported our president. So you know, if the Democrats put forth a really bad campaigner, or the Bernie bros are mad about how Bernie Sanders gets treated when he doesn't get the nomination, which he probably won't, the way this thing is kind of rigged, maybe a lot of them will stay home and people will give a second look. I mean, not the Gavin Newsom types. That's the governor of California. Anyway, so it looks like we may pick up 7 seats in the state of California. For example, there's one gentleman, David Valadao, from the 21st Congressional District. He had been a congressperson before, but then he lost his seat and was just by not very many votes. So I got a letter from Devin Nunes. I've contributed to his not his campaign, because he's got a solid seat, but to his coffers. But when he wrote a letter asking for support for David Valadao, I wrote a $1,000 check and sent it to his campaign, because that's how much I think about Devin Nunes. So anyway, I'm very hopeful about California, and we have to stay hopeful. We have to stay hopeful. But what I really want to talk about today is about RINOs. That's Republicans in name only. And these, especially about RINOs that give lip service to a zero net carbon emission future. You know, or we're gonna, like in 2015, we won't have any more carbon. That is just crazy, people. That is crazy. That's never gonna happen. That would be a policy of deindustrialization. I mean, there are some Republicans who have bought into this lie. And it's my belief that it's imperative that we stay on this path that Trump has put us on. I don't think we'll get another president like Trump. So in the 8 years of his presidency, and there will be 8 years, absolutely, we need to, how do I say, harden his policies into the Democratic Party and get rid of all these RINOs. You know, when I look at what's going on as a key to our country's greatness and success, and I contrast that with what's happening in Canada, in Australia, France, Germany, and even the UK, with all their green policies, they are ruining their economy. I mean, think about this. During the Obama era, at the end of it, remember we had all those protesters for the Dakota Access Pipeline. He had stopped the Keystone Pipeline, and we just had all these protests. You notice we don't have those kind of protests now. But if you just look at the YouTube videos, and I see them in Canada and in Europe and in Australia with these Extinction Rebellion types, Greta Thunberg acolytes, they're shutting down and creating havoc in these countries. And we just can't let that happen. And we don't. Not with President Trump. We don't. Period. So who are these RINOs? Now, okay, let me just say one thing before I get on to that. You may say, well, you know, it's climate change and stuff like that. The science on that is very poor, extremely poor. And in fact, I've become convinced that we need more carbon dioxide in our air. We do better, but there's no funding to study this. There's nobody that's looking at it except for smart people like Patrick Moore and many, many others. And I encourage everyone, the one YouTuber on the web who is just so good and entertaining and factual is Tony Heller. So I watch Tony Heller all the time, and I'm posting links to his channel on a lot of different sites because he needs to have 1 million viewers. He's got like 75,000 now. I mean, getting up there. And let me just point out, so Tony does a really great job of debunking the temperature data sets because they have been manipulated. And I knew about this long before Tony Heller came along. In fact, Michael Crichton, in doing research for his book, State of Fear, I think for 2004, it was when it came out, he found out about it. And I've seen Australian people write about it. Anthony Watts has written about it. There's been many, many people. But, you know, you might feel ill-equipped to argue this for whatever reason. But here's a shortcut. I mean, one of the things Tony pointed out in his latest video was prior to the 1980s, about 10% of the temperature data was estimated. In other words, they look back and they just fill it in. Now, almost half of the data set is estimated. They keep changing it. Now, why do they change it? And in many cases in the world, they don't even really have data, so they just fill it in. But what they're doing is making the past colder so that the present can seem warmer, that it's going up. They're taking away the heat from the past. So the 1930s, which were by far and away the hottest decade in the US, recent history, I guess. They've taken that out. And he shows that very, very well. So let's say you get in an argument with somebody and they say, well, you know, it is the temperature data or whatever. But isn't it interesting? Like, let's say they had some kind of technical argument that explains why, well, you have to estimate it sometimes because of this or that or whatever. Well, if you were doing that, then sometimes it should make the past temperature go up and sometimes go down. But that is never the case. It is always in the direction of present temperatures going up and past temperatures going down. All. If you can give me an example of where it's gone in the other direction, let me know, because I've been watching for that very carefully. Never happens. And then when they say, oh, scientists believe this. Well, how do you know? How do you know? What scientist who cares about their career will take this on? And if you were so-called like climate scientists, you absolutely won't take it on because there's no funding in it and you will lose your funding. And we have seen that. I mean, I could do a whole series of talks on that issue where they make you unhireable. One of the more recent cases is like, for example, with Judith Curry. Super, super good scientist, atmospheric scientist, originally from Georgia Tech, where she basically had to step down, and she still has a blog. It's like you just can't. So how do you know? How do you know? If the science is not free to do things, I mean, to present their findings, how do you know? When I used to subscribe to Nature and Science magazine, which are supposed to be the top two, I would be shocked by editorials talking about the importance of taking action on climate change or global warming or whatever they called it at the time. And I thought, how do you do that in a science publication? Does that mean that anything that contradicts the narrative means you won't print it? I mean, you already have the answer. How is that possible in a science publication? So anyway, those are just shortcuts to let you know this is something else entirely. So let me get back to RINOs. At first I was very, how do I say, upset when I read this, but then I reframed it, as I always try to do, to feel better, and now I feel better. But I want to point out that there are Republicans in the House and Senate who support some climate change stuff. First of all, I like a lot of the articles in the Washington Examiner, but I hate their pieces on the energy and the environment. They always start out with BS. So I probably will not renew. But let me just start with one article. Innovate or die, propane industry fights for survival in a low carbon future. So they're just talking about the propane industry here. But let me just say, the propane industry is engaging much more directly in the conversation about how to address climate change, in part to ensure it doesn't become obsolete in a zero carbon world. Hello? Who wants a zero carbon world? It is not going to happen. And then it goes on and said, to ensure its product keeps a spot in and even helps the world transition to a net zero greenhouse gas emissions future. So the Washington Examiner, an otherwise good magazine, has bought into this BS. So there was a very good article in What's Up With That. That's Anthony Watts. So it's Watts, W-A-T-T-S, Up With That. Prior to Tony Heller, this was one of the places where I could get good technical information. Like, for example, if an article came out about climate change, there would be some really good blogger or some kind of scientist that would write a rebuttal as to what was wrong with this article. And I still look at it and get their newsletter daily, basically. So here's one. Are House Republicans undermining President Trump's climate policies? Now you can ask, why does this matter? It matters because our juggernaut president will only be here for 5 more years, and then he's gone. So we have to get this implemented. This is war, people. This is war. We have to get in. If you're going to be Republican, you cannot support this CRAP. So a lot of people, well, you know, but let me just tell you, there's a thing called the House was both the Senate Climate Solutions Caucus Republican members and the House Climate Solutions Republican members. So there are 7 Republican senators, and I'm like, whoa, this is terrible. But then I thought, that's out of 53. So what, maybe 13%? And in the House, there are 23 Republican members, less than 12%. So then I thought, because there's 197 Republican members, and there were just 23 that are on this. So we need to bear down on these people. But then as I looked at the list, I thought, these people are kind of RINOs in other ways. One of them that was a really big disappointment was Senator Michael Braun. From Indiana. I thought he was a good guy. But he actually kind of helped start this when he got into Congress, which is disgusting, and he's expressed admiration for Greta Thunberg. So, boy, he is off my list, even though he's a big supporter of President Trump. Now, the other ones, Senator Rob Portman, Republican from Ohio, Lisa Murkowski, I hope she's out next time, Mitt Romney, oh, please. Susan Collins, well, okay, these are all to be expected. But here were the ones that, here's 2 others that shocked me or bothered me. And I'm very suspicious of these people for other reasons as well. Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio. Now in the House, there were a lot of names I didn't recognize, but let me point out the ones that really stood out to me. Lee Zeldin of New York. He's a big Trump supporter. The hell is he doing on this committee? Elise Stefanik, that young woman who was really supportive of Trump, our president, during the impeachment hearings and spoke out. So I had given $500 to her re-election campaign because she was under attack. So I wrote to her. Let me tell you how I wrote to her, because it's not when I saw her on this list. You can't just write to and get them to read it. There's just no way. You have to be in their district. So I looked at her district, and it included Plattsburgh. Well, back in 1976 and 77, I was stationed at Plattsburgh Air Force Base. So I just found an address in Plattsburgh and used that as my way to get a letter to her. And then I explained in the letter later how I did that. But I told her about my great disappointment that I had contributed to her campaign. I thought she was a rising star in the Republican Party, but if she supports this, there is no way. So I find that, you know, that's one way to communicate. So I was very disappointed about that. And Representative Peter King, he's spoken out in favor of President Trump. It's kind of interesting. There were 4 people from New York. Matt Gaetz. Okay? I don't trust him. I don't trust him. Matt Gaetz is on this. That's disgusting. Now, I went to the site. It's called Republicans and Democrats Working Together in Congress. The House Climate Solutions Caucus is chaired by some Democrat, and Francis Rooney, Republican from Florida. So I looked him up, Francis Rooney. But I also found out that in October 2019, Rooney announced that he will not run for re-election to Congress in 2020. So he is the only one, unfortunately I don't have it here, but there was a bill that was sponsored. A really terrible, terrible bill. There was a bill that was sponsored, and he was the only Republican on it. But that enabled them to call it bipartisan. That's another reason why it's very, very important that Republicans stick together. Because if you don't, then that will be used as ammunition from the other side to say, this is a bipartisan thing. You can't do that, people. You cannot do that. It's not allowed. And here's the other thing about some of these RINOs, a little bit off the climate thing. They don't always support President Trump. Like, I was very disappointed in Matt Gaetz when he, I don't have it in front of me, but when he said that, you know, after the attack on that Iranian leader, Soleimani, he said, you know, he voted for the House, you know, limiting the president's power. And I remember at the time that Jim Jordan said, yeah, I'd like to limit in general the limit, but I'm not going to do it going along with the Democrats because they're clearly doing this because of President Trump. And Matt Gaetz should have recognized that as well. And then you had Lindsey Graham that time with Syria, the Syrian troops, but he backed down a couple days later. I saw the fear in his eyes. He thought he could take on the president. And, oh, this is a terrible, terrible, terrible thing that President Trump did. And I was... So watch out for those people. They are not to be trusted. And Matt Gaetz, I'm very, very disappointed with you. Okay? This climate stuff is crazy. So... you know, there's comments to what's up with that when this article came out. And I want to read you a comment from a guy named Tom Abbott, because he just wrote, it was so well, that I think it's worth reading. I mean, worth hearing. And I encourage you to go to that site. It's really great. The comments are excellent. He said, the main problem with the official Republican position on human-caused climate change is that they accept the notion that CO2 is doing harm to the Earth's atmosphere and causing the climate to change in unacceptable ways, and that something needs to be done about it. Amen, amen. These Republicans have bought into the human-caused climate change lie. When you suggest carbon dioxide capture is a good idea, then you have bought into the lie, because that's one of the things that they're proposing. When you suggest that windmills and industrial solar are solutions, you have bought into the lie. Republicans need to be brought up to speed on the science of human-caused climate change because they currently have a very distorted view of the non-problem. They think it is a problem that needs to be solved. Remember, the left-wing media controls the agenda of the nation simply because they have the loudest voices and vilifies anyone who doesn't go along with their agenda. We know that, right? And Republicans know this and don't want to be vilified unnecessarily. So this causes them to pander to the agenda of the left, and that includes the issue of human-caused climate change. Of course, Trump has not weighed in and called human-caused climate change a hoax lately. Well, but he kind of has. And maybe in his second term, he'll be more upfront about that. I'm hoping. So this gives some Republicans leeway to pretend CO2 is a problem that needs fixing. It goes on and on. Trump did call catastrophic, anthropogenic, global warming a hoax, but apparently there are those in the White House, I assume family members, who do not want Trump to dismiss it for one reason or another, and he is abiding by that. I don't know. I think he's just attacking it a different way. Republicans want to be loved by the left-wing media, some of these Republicans. So they pander to them, and they are doing this with the climate issue as well. Here's a hint to Republicans. The left-wing media will never love you. They will use you, but never love you. Give it up and make decisions based on facts, not on how your decisions will be received by the left-wing media. Anyway, I thought Tom Abbott did a great job with that, so I copied out his comment. So, one way that I think our president is doing this and doing it so well is, first of all, with our economy. Our economy is doing so well compared to the rest of the industrialized world, or the Western world, you could say, that especially at the end of 8 years, the contrast will be dramatic. And a lot of that is because we don't adopt these green policies. Because if you do, energy costs grow. There's just so many problems that occur with that. And face it, China and India, they do lip service or whatever, Russia, whatever, but they got to be laughing about this. They would love to have one of these Democrats in office. I mean, you look at Bloomberg, just as a funny aside, many of you may have noticed this. He said it's not so much about China with their carbon dioxide emissions, it's really India. India's like, as Tucker Carlson pointed out, like 7% of the world's carbon dioxide emission totals, whereas I think it's 29% for China, by far and away the most. It's like, I mean, Bloomberg would be a disaster. I've never liked Bloomberg. He has all of these climate policies. It's just really awful, the money that's behind all this. I don't know. What's with Jeff Bezos? He's a smart guy. I love Amazon. Okay? I use it all the time. He gave I don't know the details, but he gave $10 billion to fight climate change? Oh my God. Oh my God. What is wrong with these people? What is wrong with these people? Do you know how much money there is in this? It's just laughable. There's no money in it for the people who are fighting this madness. However, we will win in the end, okay? And I have to tell myself, if I live a long time, which I would love to do, that after this is all over, there'll be something else. There always is. There are crazy people out there, and we have to fight them. But we will always win. We have to stay optimistic. We have to educate the young people. It's not that hard. It's not that hard. You tell them about stories that you heard when you were young. I do this all the time. I have no trouble talking to young people, unless they're kind of like already brainwashed. I don't even bother. But most young people, you know, they just are living their lives. So plant that seed. And we all know there's fake media out there. This is one of the things I'm glad about, because I first really found out about the fake media with the whole climate change thing. I was shocked that the things I was learning and reading about were never, ever in the paper. And then I would write letters to, which would get printed, by the way, to the LA Times, but I could never directly address climate change. I could just talk about the energy economy and things like that. I could skirt around it because they had already had a policy that they would not print anything that questioned the global warming narrative. And that's true for all they won't print it. So people don't even know. That's why it's so important to spread the news about Tony Heller, because his stuff is fun to watch. And other good sites, we just have to get that message out, and it is growing. I find that there's many, many people who are with us on this. We will win. Thanks for listening.